We are live. Welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup. I have the great pleasure to introduce Matt Lee, who is the Senior Director for Security and Compliance at PAX 8. Thank you very much for joining us today. Much appreciated. How are you?
I'm doing awesome and getting better by the second, which I learned a long time ago is the right answer every time.
Listen, we just spent about 10 minutes geeking out on your setup, on our setup, our mutual
Yeah,
setup
yeah.
for these type of interviews. So we are in constant mission to elevate our experience throughout the pandemic, which are probably going to be continuing doing these these live sessions. But welcome to the show. I wanted to just maybe I'm so excited because there's so many questions. I looked at your background, did some research, looked at some postings and so on. So first of all, uh, I gotta make a comment about your amazing beard. So I'm so jealous. Let's start that. That's like an icon for you, right? So and you have a
Yeah.
charity event where I'm going to see you without it soon, right? So maybe talk to me about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So, my beard, just as a quick side note, started as a joke with my sales guy, right? He was real prim and proper when I was in an MSP. And, he looked at me one day and says, Matt, if you don't shave, like, I'm not going to be able to invite you to any more important meetings and sales meetings. And I said, well, Randall, I'd wager you're incorrect. And then it turned into a giant beard, right? But yeah, no. So, my mission, which you've probably seen before, is really to drive the understanding and education around cybersecurity and awareness, right? That's what I do, and my beard has become a large part of that kind of a tongue-in-cheek conversation starter. But ultimately, we're going to shave it in November at a conference called IT Nation, and we're going to shave it for charity. So companies and individuals are going to have the opportunity to fund me reaching a certain number in which I shave my beard for charity, and so that's the plan. But yeah, we'll
So
see.
we'll provide the link below, so anybody who's watching this and wants to contribute to Matt Lee's mission, highly recommend to do so. So let's talk a bit about your mission, your personal mission statement, which is raise the tide in
Yeah.
cybersecurity for SMBs and enterprise and so on. So first of all, are we in a state where we actually need to raise the tide? Like, where are we in, and you're laughing. Maybe we can jump into that and what made you adopt that theme?
You have this challenge, right, where cybersecurity and technology in general, as we talk about it, came into our lives very rapidly and iterated very, very rapidly. And much like, kind of the Industrial Revolution, we start with technology and it goes crazy and people do things that cut corners or potentially don't understand the implications of making their steam boiler only thin walled, and then it blows up and kills someone, and there's no regulation and there's no court and there's no process or way to drive that forward. And so as you think about that, we kind of find ourselves in a very similar situation in technology. If you wanted to sue someone over technology, the prosecutorial challenge of that, just from an understanding of the language and understanding of what things mean, of what even negligence or gross negligence might look like in technology, is really hard, right? It's really tough. And so I think there's a situation where we have to raise the tide in order to drive this forward. Some of that could be regulatory, some of that could be from the insurance markets, some of that can be from the lending markets. But understand that when we say raise the tide, it should be good. Everybody's boat's going to float. We're going to be fine. Unless you're anchored to the ground, in which case it could be a really rough tide rise for you, right? And so I think, yes, from a state of cybersecurity and a state of the understanding of everything around driving businesses to do what's right and driving people and making it easier for them to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong, from a cybersecurity perspective, we're way under that watermark. Even if you look at enterprise, which has traditionally been 10 to 15 years ahead of small to mid-sized business, those boys and girls still, the C-suite doesn't have the CIO sitting directly, or the CISO sitting directly on the board and advising, right? Like, you don't have any of those kind of things because it's always been thought of as an expense or as maybe a necessary evil, as opposed to, hey, if we do the right things, we can drive business faster in a more secure way and have some responsibility to our constituencies' data. So yes, we're in a monstrously horrible state that I could probably dig into for an hour and a half. But
Yeah, well, let's we'll dive into that a little bit. But as they say, maybe tide raises all, have all boats, right? Raises all
yeah,
boats
that's
as
the
well.
goal.
That
Yep.
is the goal. So, what got you into cybersecurity? Let's walk us through like your career path, because you were not always cybersecurity professional, something that you
Right.
adopted throughout this past several years. But you started your career in finance. I saw that.
I did.
So which is
Yeah.
I always like, it's always intriguing to me, like how people pivoted to cybersecurity, but they take a lot of the kind of the prior knowledge and the aptitude to learn and so on, and take that and apply that in the existing role. So maybe walk us through that.
Yeah, so I actually started with my Series 766 LHVA in Florida at 19. And, I kind of just got mentally bored. I would excel at any career I was in. I was in banking at Wachovia Bank. I think I made AVP by 25 or so, 26, whatever it might have been. And so I just would get bored, and I'd want to do something different. I'd want to understand a different piece of something. And so I'd change every 3 or 4 years. I went through diamonds and numismatic and non-numismatic gold and, mortgages, and then ultimately fell in technology, right? And so I started at a small to mid-sized MSP, or we were 7 humans there at the time, and we were serving about 30, 40 clients. And over the 10-year period, what I learned was that I could reinvent myself a lot as we continued to grow. And that company grew to be, upwards of 30 some odd $million in revenue, and ultimately sold for an undisclosed number in November of last year. But through that time, as we started becoming really large, as we merged from a 40 or so person MSP doing $5 to $6 million in revenue, to merge with 4 or 3 others equal size, and say, okay, let's reimagine the world. And so I was the head of technology at the company as we merged. And I started with this understanding of the Kaseya event that had just happened to MSPs, where MSPs were being completely ransomed and all of their clients completely ransomed just because of a vulnerability in a Kaseya server. And it's a little bit understated on what that was, but underexplained. But ultimately, I had sent out an email on a Wednesday. And I said, listen, my single greatest fear is that we're the next MSP that suffers this same kind of catastrophic client-wide, attack. And I wrote that email. I sent it out to all of my new merged partners, right? Because nobody knows me at this point. And I really didn't have a super cybersecurity focus. I kind of did, right? Before that, I'd spent a lot of time with a very forward-thinking company that was going down the 800-171 track very heavily, and then ultimately CMMC. And so I had a real understanding of what it took, I think, to deliver cybersecurity, and that understanding, just from being the GRC side of it. And so ultimately, I wrote this email, and on the Thursday, that next morning, I get a message on Teams from our Florida office, which I didn't even know we had a Florida office, right? Like, that's the fun part of this merger. And so, I said, hey, listen, he says, I have that same fear. In fact, the company we were with before this acquisition, and this was after the merger we were already acquiring, before finishing even integration, I said, this company I used to work for that you guys bought was ransomed back in February. Now, this is like September. And I said, that's horrifying. And so I get on the call with some of the upper leadership, and I just said, guys, I'm going to be honest with you. One of 2 things has happened, and I really expected to get fired. And I said, one of 2 things has happened here. Either you guys absolutely were lied to, and that you were materially disclosed improperly from the company you bought. And I call this company Voldemort now, right? Because it's the name that shouldn't be mentioned. But and I said, or you guys are all idiots. And I really expected to get fired. I genuinely was just so offended that we would buy something that had a massive, breach that hadn't even had the paint dry yet. And, they kind of petted me on the head and said, Matt, don't worry your pretty little head, essentially. We bought them as just an arm's length transaction. We only own the assets. We don't own the risk. And they have an insurance policy that indemnifies us against some of that risk. And don't worry. And I said, guys, the risk is inside your doors. Like, let me just be honest with you. I don't think you understand. Shortly thereafter, this was Friday, so another day at 5 o'clock, I get a text message from our head of sales. And they didn't fire me. They just were nice to me, right? And he said, listen, Matt, your single worst fear has come true. I said, man, just because I was a jerk yesterday, like, don't pull my chain. That's not cool, right? like legit. And from that moment on, when I got on that airplane that day to go deal with, and I still almost tear up, but to go deal with these 1,200 endpoints that were impacted, and start working through the legal aspects and involving, our Lewis Brisbane and our insurer and the incident response teams and all of this, I kind of took on an understanding that we are so screwed. Like the reality of this is that the threat actors are better than us. The threat actors are faster than us. They're more motivated. They're less tied to technical debt. And yet here we sit with enterprises that could never go towards an all zero trust or cloud type model because they have 4 million years of technical debt behind them. Well, guess what? SMB, same boat. And so that's really what drove me into cybersecurity. I responded through our team at this MSP to about 79 incidents across our client base of 470 or so clients over the course of the next 18 months. And really ramped up the outreach and education, spent a lot of time on advisory panels for vendors and trying to drive this understanding that their code base is also our problem, right? Their technical debt, their choices not to put a sprint cycle on fixing, their authentication platform, but rather move forward with the next feature. And so I started advising anyone we spent $1 million with during that time. As well, and kind of driving our interests for security, driving our interest towards single sign-on, driving our interest for role-based access control and things to reduce blast radius. And, that's the short story. I'm a little loquacious sometimes, but that's kind of how I got into cybersecurity, if you will, was really just that.
It's an incredible
experience.
story. It sounds like serious on the job training, OJT.
Yeah. It's like, how'd you become a boxer? I got punched in the face a lot. Like,
and just like a boxer, right? Everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the face, right?
Boy, how many times my plans were wrong, right? Like it was, you learned a lot. I mean, our incident response plan, we sat down for, 12 hours, 2 days in a row at this MSP when we became, this large revenue stream. And the first time we went through that incident, it was so wrong. I mean, it was so overthought. It wasn't tactical. It didn't approach reality. There was 100 supporting documents that didn't exist. Like it was really broken. But I think that's my advocation to people is like, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to win. You don't even have to stop the threat actors. My advocation to people is that you just have to be defensible in how you choose to do that. You have to be able to stand in front of David and Matt and 12 of your peers and say, hey, would a reasonable person think I did what was right? Yeah. If you do these X things, right?
And
so
that's, Matt, not to cut you off, but I think that's also I forgot what's it called, but there's a legal term to that as well, because that's what happens when there's a breach and you go to court and you prove
the
that
reasonable person rule is that term. Yeah.
Okay,
reasonable
perfect.
man rule, technically, but I like
where you've taken the steps to protect yourself in a reasonable amount, because there's always and it's unsustainable I mean, you can spend millions of dollars to protect $100 worth of assets. Like, I mean, and even then you might not be super, completely protected.
Well, and what I mean by that is often it's not just the money from a defensibility perspective, because I do agree with you. That's what I'm talking about is the reasonable person rule and how it applies to being defensible in your actions, right? From a lawsuit, from privacy acts, like you're in New York, right? You have, or Jersey, sorry. But you have Shield Act, right? So you have things that can tie into actual risk for companies from loss. But my point is that, in the way security starts, just like my on-the-job training, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't understand any of the implications. I learned them. I learned you can't reboot servers. You need memory forensics. You need the ability to preserve evidence. You need immutability. You need I learned those things, right? I learned them all. But, I think the point is that we always shoot from the hip. We're an arrogant profession. Cybersecurity, all of technology is a fairly arrogant profession. And by that, I mean, even doctors were in the beginning, right? When doctors first came on the scene and were, kind of a thing, right? You had people that could basically saw off a leg and cauterize or put leeches on you. And yet it grew into this massive, all these other capabilities, all the other stuff we should be doing for the body, all these other things.
Matt.
Yeah, leeches over the leg sawing, right? Like, yeah, I'll do that. But, the point is that just in the same way, doctors at some point had to stop shooting from the hip. At some point, you had to have some school learning, some basic knowledge, and then some apprenticeship, and then some approval from someone else. And then you also have the ability to not be a doctor anymore. You have the ability to take away your profession. If you fail a morbidity and mortality, review enough times because you killed a patient by not following good practices, you're going to stop being a doctor. But that's not the case in cybersecurity. That's not the case in technology. There's nothing.
Do you mind if we dig into that for a little bit?
Sure.
I absolutely love that. So even though if I look at the industry as a whole, doing this for a while, there is still some maturity level that's coming. I mean, some organizations are more mature than others, and I think some security professionals are more mature than others. but there's definitely a movement towards becoming more mature industry and profession as a whole.
More professional. Yeah,
Professionals,
for
yeah,
sure.
but it's still not there from a almost like a regulated type of environment,
Right.
like be able to practice medicine. Do you think that we should be heading that way, and people should get certified and have like a just like a what's the medical board where they decide they can
Yeah.
practice? Do you think that should
Yeah, the American Medical
yeah.
Association, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's another one of those fields where it has to be self-regulated in some degree, right? If you tried to legislate this in the U.S. government or in many of the other foreign governments,
Hmm.
you already know that people don't understand technology. You already know that people don't understand what the hell I mean when we're talking about phishing or tokens or OAuth tokens or FIDO or any. We already know that. Nor do we expect the legislators to understand every term in doctors, right? Or every term of how protein and aromatase uptake inhibitors and like you don't expect them to understand, methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus, right? You don't expect
Hold on,
those
Matt. Are you
things.
a doctor
Yeah.
as well? You have like a pretty
No,
pretty
no,
big.
but I have a high retention of things.
That's
I have a
amazing.
pretty eidetic memory, I suppose. Um, but yeah, thanks. No, but the point is like we don't expect our legislators to understand that they self-regulate, right? Because of the speed of the organization, you have to have people that understand it to say whether or not the barrier is good or not, right? There's too many facets, there's too many delineations, there's too many variables. And I think unlike a construction industry where you could kind of regulate that and set some guideposts and everything stays about the same, steel's still the same as steel and concrete's still the same as concrete, and I'm being a little summative, but the point is that our world needs to be self-regulated. I do think there needs to be certifications. I do think there needs to be the ability to not be an attorney anymore. I think there needs to be an ability to not be a CPA anymore if you fail, right, enough times and you show gross negligence or the inability to understand your constituency, right? Like look at, stockbrokers. When I had my Series 7, that's a self-regulated entity. And it says, listen, if you do things that violate your fiduciary responsibility to your constituency, we will stop you from being a stockbroker, and your entire livelihood and everything you've done can go away. Same thing with doctors, same thing with attorneys, same thing with CPAs. And yet I can destroy your business by leaving one firewall port open. I can destroy your business by not turning on MFA after I finish doing something or not having enough systemic processes to make sure I do. Right? I can destroy your business by giving you bad advice around technology. I can destroy your... Why do we have a gap in that regulation that there is nothing that even sets a self-regulatory body in motion, right? That takes an ISAC or an ISAO and drives it into self-regulatory model or
And
something.
can I be a bit of a kind of a devil's advocate here?
Sure.
So you look at the medical profession, right? So there's a lot of regulations around that, and you can't practice medicine, but that doesn't mean necessarily that even regulated doctors with practice license to practice are good. Some of them have got that license in, but they don't get updated practices, and they don't update their
Yeah.
information and so on. So you know where I'm going with this. And I think that if anything, the cybersecurity is moving way faster than medicine, at least just from
Sure.
my take on it, because there's things happening all the time. It's still not, in my opinion, not the be all
I,
and end all, right?
I think that's because you and I are in cybersecurity. If you
Okay.
were in medicine, you would understand that, oh my God, they can do this new type of seed implantation to do cancer treatment. Oh my God, they can do. So, like, I think the speed's probably similar. I
Hmm.
think the delineation you have is that medicine has enough specialty separation and clear understanding of what an oncologist is, and clear understanding of what a skin doctor is, a dermatologist, a clear understanding of a podiatrist. So, like, you have that delineation. Whereas in our world, what are you? What are you in cybersecurity? Well, I'm a blue teamer. I'm a red. I'm
Purple.
on the GRC. Right. And so the conversation becomes, I think that we understand the body of knowledge because it is such a generalist practice and the speed does move faster. And I think medicine probably moves at a similar speed, but much more verticalized in some degree, and that you would only have some responsibility towards specialty. And I think that's an advocation. Somebody should be an IAM specialist. People should be a cloud specialist. People should be, right? Like the generalist aspect is meant to be that first strategy delivery, right? Like my doctor says, Matt, you probably ought to lose weight, but you have enough problems, you go to a heart surgeon, right? Like at some point. And so there's these aspects there. But I also think that back to kind of the devil's advocate of this is that I imagine that regulatory combination and handshake for doctors combined with a self-regulatory model for AMA and boards and maintaining your licensure and maintaining good education programs that's in that private sector right, probably took a while to make happen, right? And probably had some broken eggs in that process, right? And so I don't expect that we wouldn't go through the same. But in the same breath, even if you had a bad doctor or someone that didn't stay up with things or was behind, I don't have Matt Lee setting up shop in a clinic with a sticky note on the front and saying, "Hey, David, let's come in and take a look at them tonsils, brother, and I'm going to prescribe some stuff." Like, that has much less capability of being delivered in some linear fashion. So, would
Yeah.
be my opinion.
And it's interesting, if we take that a little further. So how do you measure the effectiveness or like the quality of practitioners today? I mean, with
Yeah.
doctors, you go online, you do some search, and there's like, the patients rate the
Mm-hmm.
doctors. There's a lot of this, rate my doctor, whatever the case may be. But for us practitioners, it's not the case. It's I
Right.
guess just a word of mouth. I guess people just, they call, like, people that or may
Yep.
know, and they ask them. But there's no such like rating. Should it be one? Is there? Do you think that there's a
It's an
way for us
interesting
to, you
concept.
know?
I think some of the challenges, short story is, until you have some standard of care like you would with a doctor that
Mhm.
you could compare against, you're really just dealing with politics, I think, at that
But
point,
a
right?
lot of
Like,
it is like, how they make you feel, right? So, for
oh,
example,
100%. Yeah, it's
with
the empathy
people,
aspect. Yeah.
yeah, the empathy, like, most patients don't really understand, like what they've been gone through, like, what's kind of
Right.
process that, what the treatment was.
Yeah.
And I think it's also very true when you went out to see these customers and help them with the casea. um, the majority of them were like, we probably had some googly eyes when you were talking about it, but you still helped them, but you made them feel like you were, they were
Oh,
well taken care of. So they
boy,
will
you
rate
hit
you
the nail
high,
on the
five
head.
stars. What's that?
Yeah. You hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think that you're dealing with, PTSD in those situations, right? Like, seriously. And so, if you think about, like, I still have it. I mean, when I look back at my main incident that we dealt with that impacted my lives and the people around me, that impacted maybe 170 families that might not get to get paid to eat, right? Out of that event. Is traumatic, right? So you're right about that. And I think doctors are the same way. You find out you have this disease, you're going to have to treat it, or this malady, or whatever it may be. There's the fear of going in. Is it cancer? There's the fear. Like, as you dig through those, it's going to be about how they made you feel, how well they connected with you, and those things. So I think there's some value in that once you have a standard of care. What I mean by that is, a cancer treatment has X efficacy. It's known. It has a fairly linear way it's going to be delivered for doctors and practitioners. And I think that now we don't have that, right? Like, we have people arguing over every aspect of what we do. And it's only recently that you start having really adherable frameworks that start to set actual opinions on how it's done. Insurance companies are starting to say, are you using these products? They're naming products in the insurance forms. Like, we're starting to see, this understanding of the problem. I don't think we're starting to see the solve. And so I think a rating system on practitioners would only be how much I don't like what I'm having to go through in my traumatic, or situation right now, really, of legacy debt, right? Like, think about it if you went this way. If you painted a pure picture, and I won't argue the merit of this, but if you said, okay, what if I started a new company tomorrow? If I started a new small business or mid-sized business tomorrow, hell, even enterprise, I am probably not going to start with a lot of infrastructure. I'm probably not going to start with a lot of my own legacy OSs that I install in bare metal or VMs. I'm not going to do much of that. I might still use platform services. I might still use, Terraform to modify different, third parties. But I'm likely not going to start up with a lot of infrastructure. And so if you take that, you almost have a stick in the sand. Your competitor will be better than you, faster than you, and more agile, and probably more scriptably secure than you. I don't have as many variables. I can write one script and apply it to every client that uses Microsoft Azure AD as an identity and extends it into this MFA solution and extends it into this collection solution for an EDR. Like, I now have the same blocks. I made Legos. You know what's beautiful about Legos? You can build anything with them. They're known, they're predictable. You have 2 square, 4 square, 6 square, 8 squares. You have the ones that are angled. You have
Very painful though, when Matt, when you walk on them.
yeah, bro, you ain't lying. I've had kids in the house. So yeah, my two youngins hurt me that way.
So I love that. So the ability to get this competitive advantage of not have to deal with legacy infrastructure is one of the key
Technical
elements for us.
debt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
technical debt. I love that, especially for cybersecurity, because you can start the infrastructure from the ground up the right way,
Right.
as opposed to start building, like, and it's true for, for almost any industry. You can apply that anywhere. Like,
Yep.
you start fresh. It's like, even building a house. Sometimes it's better just to take it down instead of
Yeah.
fixing, and then build a
100%.
foundation from start to scratch. So do you think that there's also a case where in cybersecurity, if we applied for, as we continue the kind of the analogy with medicine, right, where we, the disease is cured, but the patient died, you
Right.
know. So I
Yeah.
guess that's we do that all the
There
time.
will be death in this. Like, unfortunately, I think the challenge you have is we're at least choosing the death, if you will. And I don't mean to be macabre, but the point being, right now we're getting sniped out by threat actors because of our poor hygiene, because of our poor inability to overcome our own board. Like, I've never met a company that didn't have budget for cyber after they had a breach. Not ever. Not a single time.
Yeah,
Not
but
ever.
that's post, right?
Right.
That's post, and then
Because they've had
you
a
also,
feeling they've been violated. They now have understood that this is real, right? They broke through their layers of it won't happen to us.
but it's still, it doesn't, it's mind-boggling to me that right now they see the magnitude of some of these breaches,
Yeah,
not even that, just the vulnerabilities out there.
like
So
Log4j, like so
Log4j,
ubiquitously. Yeah, yeah,
but all you have to hear about Kaseya, like Solo
sure,
Winds. I mean, all of, I mean,
all of
it's
them.
just
Yeah,
it's a barrage of these, and still there are companies that you go talk to the board, and they're like, okay, well, we have X amount of dollars for for
yeah,
cybersecurity, and that's just as so they still does not they do not get affected by
yep.
having that massive news all the time,
But you
and
will.
yeah.
And I think the point is you're starting to see privacy acts. You're starting to see GDPR have teeth. You're starting to see CCPA have teeth. You're starting to see Shield have teeth. We will kill these companies, and we should. And their competitors will be faster than them and more secure. And their competitors will. So I think this market is heading for a cliff, both in SMB and maybe a little more isolated in the enterprise, just because you have so much more legal capacitance to overcome this prosecutorial challenge, right? But I do think that you will see, especially in the mid market, you will start seeing the 100-person company, the 200-person company that feeds families of 100 and millions of dollars in revenue get destroyed every day. I mean, I had a company that made 60 million or so in annualized revenue, and they lost 1.6 million dollars in one business email compromise. Go recover from that. And when the insurance starts saying we're not paying because you didn't have MFA on that account, why didn't you have MFA on that account? Well, we
Well,
were troubleshooting something and we were dealing with this one thing and they didn't have a process to put it back on. And we're not paying. Have a nice day. See ya.
Merck just won, right? I saw
They
you
did
comment.
just win the act of
Yeah.
war. Yeah, yeah, they did. That's and I don't think they'll win forever. I think you'll see the next policy, the next change continue to start including these acts of war. But even when you go down that road, who's going to say it's an act of war? How are you going to do attribution? The point is they're struggling with the challenge. They're trying to figure out how, and you got me triggered on this insurance conversation, but you know,
That's the whole point. That's exactly what I was
you
going
did
to.
well. Yeah, well, so your insurers in general have treated this like it's actuariable, right? I don't know if that's a word, but I make them up all the time. In fact, every word we ever use has been made up at some point. But the actuarial aspect of saying Matt Lee has high blood pressure and he's fat and he does these life things, he's going to die this way, right? At least within some probability enough to be able to make profit on a certain number. Well, when you start saying cybersecurity, let's dig into that a bit. Let's say, okay, we're going to write a policy on cyber insurance. Or we're going to make it a general rider for your general insurance policy, and we're going to guess at how much we're going to have to pay this out. Well, then they don't realize that the Matt might be an idiot that deployed that, and he didn't even deploy the web application firewall properly. And Matt might be an idiot because they don't have a culture inside the security. They don't have an insider threat policy. They don't have thousands of variables. And so you're starting to see the response from that. They can't make classes of insurance. They're having to just continually raise price. They're having to fight ways to pay it. They're having to change the structure afterwards. Like they lost a bet and are trying to squelch, right?
Isn't it also? But that's also true for if you look at the vehicle insurance, right?
Sure.
You can have the best vehicle with all the security features on it and so on, but the drivers are idiots. They're
Yeah.
drinking and driving. So, but there's almost like elements there. They're similar to in nature, as you mentioned. You can buy the best firewall,
Yeah.
but you don't install it, you don't know how to use it, you don't apply, and so on. So there's a lot of
Totally.
analogy over there, right? So
Yeah, but you're looking at though a difference of that same driver that doesn't know how to handle the car on a road, out there figuring it out, and it's worth millions, great insurance, gets in a wreck, compared to that same car is now being chased down like Mad Max style by 100 other cars, right? That's the difference. I mean, I think when you start looking at cybersecurity, there are active threat actors that
Yeah,
have
I love that.
active, faster
Man, I can't throw any
capabilities.
question like at you that you don't. I love that.
It's,
Very good.
analogies are your friend, right? Like they help understand the concept.
So
But
we are in a Mad Max, world.
yeah,
If
we
you let the,
are.
okay.
I can script 100 attacks in a second. I can script things that don't even care who you are. I'm just going to get you. I can find enough data about you on Facebook and social media to attack you. I can find ways to overcome the psychology aspects, even against a cybersecurity professional. It happens all the time to me too. Like you will be able to see that the threat actors have such an advantage right now. They're playing football downfield, right? Like they're absolutely playing on a playing field like this. And it comes from one great conversation that I've had. So let's make up this company called Microsoft. And let's say Microsoft makes software. Why in the fuck can I make an insecure password? How's that even possible? Why is that even possible? Well, we just want to sell SKUs and we don't want to make anybody mad. So we don't fight back up against people. We don't make secure standards by default because if we did, people would be mad at us. That's what's wrong. That's what's wrong. All the conditions that create that sentence are what's wrong. And I think that the point is that we have to see that change to where cars, when you drive them down the road, even if you are playing Mad Max, probably have a pretty good crash rating, probably have a fairly decent protection of the gas tank from crash and explosion, probably have a fairly decent roll cage, probably have a fairly decent engine system that if I do impact something very hard, it's going to roll underneath me and protect the passenger at all costs. Right? Like you look at that and that's the difference. Our software doesn't. Our cars are literally not protected. We're driving a Pinto, right? Like, and I think that's the problem is that when you start getting into that, there's a shared responsibility. And what I love about cloud models, what I love about driving towards SaaS, other than the vendor lock-in, is really just this understanding that you're shifting some of that responsibility, whether it's played out in court or not yet, whether it's played out in the court of public opinion or not yet, you're starting to drive that shared responsibility to someone that can own it at scale in the same variable path. Look at all the announcements Microsoft's made in the last 2 years around cybersecurity that they've discovered from their telemetry and capabilities, right? Like look at the things that they've done and grown. I never thought I'd say Defender was a decent product ever in my life. And yet here we sit. So I think that we're starting to grow towards the right direction to be able to solve some of these things, if you will. But sorry, I got off on a tangent there.
No, it's good. I think that the answer deserves 10 seconds of silence to let it all kind of, sink in. No, it's very good. What's your take on supply chain? So Kaseya was one that really affected the MSSPs, but we see this, it's this ongoing issue.
Yeah.
And, coming back to the idea of like these new companies that are outsourcing everything. So their attack service is much greater because they're like outsourcing any non-essential, non-business function to other companies. So,
Yeah.
And that also includes like smaller companies, like, even SMBs.
A lot of them. Yeah, tons of it.
Partners. How do you control that? It just is an
You have to
ongoing
raise the
battle.
tide. Yeah, you have to raise the tide. That's the problem, right? Like if you think about it, when we come to supply chain attack, let's just break that down a little bit. So you're saying that I'm at risk because I do business with this other company that either uses this software, produces this software, does a service for me, creates access for me, whatever it might be. My HVAC vendor. I'm looking at you, Target, right? So you talk about supply chain attack. And all you're really saying is, well, I'm perfect at security and I do things really well. But my partner over there didn't, so I got compromised. Horse shit. You'll get compromised too. The challenge is we all have to start putting security first. We all have to start putting code review first. We all have to have vulnerability disclosure programs. We all have to have paths to look at our own security and culture. If you looked at that and said, hey, that HVAC vendor that compromised Target, or hey, SolarWinds that compromised most of the United States government, right? Or you talk about those concepts and you start saying, okay, well, they need to harden their... We all do. You're probably is the same time as a company that's outsourcing, and I'm talking to you, enterprise. You're probably out producing code. Someone has come in and said, hey, I want to buy all these firewalls, but I'm not going to do it unless you have this feature. That feature goes ahead of your security vulnerability. You know how I know? Ask me how I know. I had to fill out one of those forms to ask said firewall company to put enough revenue behind what I was asking for to rebuild their auth platform that was still based on a federated Microsoft domain running on users.local, right? Like, why? Well, because they couldn't get that in front of the other sprints.
Or maybe they were trying to do, security by obscurity.
Shut up. Jerk.
Maybe you're just reading it all wrong.
We're just hiding it. Users.local. Nobody would ever think about that. Oh,
Just
that's
like using
hilarious.
like
Yeah.
some
But
Windows 95, and nobody ever knows how
but they
to
looked at me and said, Matt, well, how many firewalls are you going to buy if we fix this auth platform? I said, are you going to hold me to it? They said, no. I said, write down fucking 10,000. I don't care. Write it, whatever. Well, the point is that the whole system's kind of broken in that regard, and that everything's tied to revenue and net new, and not tied to some understanding of this like loss expectancy that's real, that's going to become more poignant over the years. I mean, if you look at Home Depot's case, they got out with a scant fee that was less than their parking lot resurfacing budget for the Northern Carolina district, right? Like, you know what I mean? So to your point, there's no teeth, so nobody cares on the board. There's going to be teeth. We're going to fix that.
But and then
Yeah.
I also noticed that you mentioned that there's this whole notion about the experience of going through a breach,
Yeah.
and that causes that effect of being, quoting you, being violated.
Yeah.
Creates that awareness, or the drive to fix things. How do you simulate something like that without actually going through the motions and getting violated?
Right.
Like, what's the how do you create that in a board environment to make sure that you realize it's real and make them feel that it's real
Yeah,
without
there's a couple answers probably to that, right? The first one's like live hacking demos; those really help. They show that it's easy. They show what it does at the SMB space, at least. But I think the best way that I've ever thought of doing it would be just compromise their phones, right? Kevin Mitnick was great at that, right? Setting up a poison watering hole and compromise their phones, or show that you can do it to them. If you were to do things like that to someone personally, if you show their family, if you show access to financial information, if you show access to proclivities, if you show access to, right? Like, how many executives come to you and gone, man, I just got this email that says that they've got camera of me jerking it on film, and they're going to release it to my friends list, and I'm in. Well, have you been doing that? Right? Well, where's the concern, right? Like, so you look at that. I mean, those are the type of ones where
Matt, there's so many places I can go with this, but we're trying to keep it like G-rated.
fair. We're keeping it PG or G, right? But the point is that like when you touch something personal, you abscond this gap that people live in business, right? Like, people forget about people in business. When you're in business, you have this entity. It is the company. It's going to continue. We're not worried about the company. It doesn't have risk. If I go show you a picture of your kid in the school they go to, you have a much different feeling, right? And now it's my real life. Now it's no, your kids won't get fed if your company gets destroyed and you're out of business. Like, everything you've built is just as susceptible to this. Right. And I think that, asking your question of, I like hacking people's phones and making them connect to poison watering holes and showing information and credentials and things.
And you love that concept, live compromise. That's what you talk about, right?
Yeah.
It's part of that.
Yeah. Live compromised, right?
Sorry,
This
live
understanding.
live compromise.
That's great. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. So I've had this notion when I was at the MSP that I was at, where I really started realizing I can't ever stop it. I can't win. So if I can't win, then I have to live compromised. I have to understand that there's some degree of compromisation, right? Like, I don't have a great analogy, but the thought process is like, okay, I know that they're going to compromise me, and I have a Dallas office, and my Dallas office has Team Alpha, Team Bravo, and Team Charlie. And Team Bravo only serves 19 clients, but I have 470 clients, let's say. Well, I want to be able to limit the blast radius so that if a compromised individual gets compromised, their scope, their principle of least privilege only allows them access to those, so that compromise becomes only going to come from that, limited set of individuals, and I can now limit the blast radius of said compromisation. So living compromised is more about focusing on the other aspects of delivering security. And this goes all the way back to my defensibility conversation, right? If you're trying to be defensible, you're following a framework. If you're following a framework, and let's say it's CIS, then you have your protect, detect, identify, defend, recover, and respond and recover, not defend, respond and recover, right? And so you basically get into all of those pieces. Well, we always focus on the protect. I mean, the IG1 controls are, like 70% protect. But the faster you can respond, the faster you can discover that there's a problem, the faster that you can identify that and limit its damage and show healthy hygiene around the ability to do all those things, the faster you're more defensible in court. Hey, look, I did everything you could imagine. Like, I caught it within 13 minutes. I was able to limit the damage. I had all these practices in place that worked. I had a few that failed, but here's what like, when you start getting into that, that's defensibility. And if you can do that along a framework where you're not even the smartest guy or gal in the room, right? Where you're not even the person going, I'm Matt, and I'm real good at the security pooter stuff, so I'm going to choose these. No, I know that there's 18 basic controls. If I implement all of those to the best of my ability and I iterate and make them better every time and I look at their effectiveness and efficacy and I drive it forward, then I'm defensible. I'm following the AMA advice, right? Like I'm following guidelines from somebody else other than me that has sat down and looked at it empirically and said, hey, these are the things you do to reduce risk. But yeah, live compromised is this understanding that you have to focus on the other aspects of those operations from CIS other than just protect, right? You have to be able to respond and recover. And you have to be able to identify the issue.
And I think that's where a lot of companies struggle, right? Because they just don't have the capacity. They don't see the bigger picture. I think they just they go and they're like squirrels, right? They're like this. Okay, what should we fix now? And it's really tough to prioritize. Where to spend the money. What to do first. And a lot of times it has nothing to do with money, really. It's like you can do some very basic.
Taking
hygiene.
away local admin rights has
Right.
more impact on anything,
Right.
and yet I walked into a company and I still have local admin rights. I'm horrified. But I know that happened because of support structure, because of
No,
hearts
man,
and
just
minds.
trust you because you're
Well, they're not smart.
you're cool cyber dude, and
Yeah,
their beard
sure.
carries a lot of authority.
Wait,
So
physically, pun
yeah,
intended.
no, they just no, they don't. You have the authority to have admin rights, and and then they don't want to offend the users, right?
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
me as a user, I'd love to have admin rights because I want to
Yeah.
make some changes on my desktop.
But every
a lot.
security product you have, I now have the ability to forklift underneath because I'm an admin when I land on your system as you. Right? Like that's what's wrong. And back to your point, it costs nothing to change that other than some infrastructure and some hearts and minds and the ability for an executive to say, hey, head of sales, I understand you're pissed off that this doesn't work and you were affected by this, but you know what? That's kind of the price we pay to show our constituents and our clients and partners that we actually give a shit about cybersecurity. And so we do try to take care of that. And that's the reason that sales presentation had a challenge. And I understand overcoming that's hard when the rest of your field isn't dealing with that. But I will say we're starting to see the light at the tunnel. I went to CSA this last year at this executive kind of invite panel thing with my CISO, Brad Fugit. And the Starbucks CISO was standing up there and he was talking about not zero trust, but at least the beginning of the architecture. But he was talking about passwordless sign-on. He was talking about OAuth or FIDO2 type tokenization methodologies to sign in without passwords for all of his baristas and all of his people at Starbucks. And I don't want to misquote him, but I probably will because it happens. But he basically said that when he went to the board and was trying to fight for it, he couldn't fight for it on the merits of security that would increase. Right? It wasn't about that. He had to fight for it, which is also quite smart, and I advocate everyone to do this. But he had to fight for it in business conversation and say, listen, if the baristas can all save 22 seconds on signing in to ring up the coffee, then the line of the coffee is going to go by this much faster over this many stores, by 15,000 stores or this. Right? And you can actually enumerate that as a business enablement and a conversation around why better technology is a business enabler, but it's also more secure. And I think that's also a little bit the same proof of the poison of we can't just go on security merits alone. Yeah. And I think that has to shift at some point, right? We sometimes go on, standards of care alone when we make decisions with doctors, right? Like we sometimes start to honor that that's such a big piece of how we survive or not. But we still have to paint it in a way that the board understands it today, in a way that executives understand it today. It's it can't last. This has to have a condensed timeline. And I think the education of an executive, a VP, or a C-level walking up and going, hey, smart guy about this stuff. Let's talk. Like, there has to be at least a standard of understanding. And I'm not saying that the executives have to get all of the details, nor do I go and learn about, peptide uptake for bodies, right? Like, it's not my world. But I think we have a standard of care in doctors and attorneys that we don't have in our industry. And if I'm a bad advisor, I'm just giving you bad advice and you're just going to trust it. So I do think we have to have some barrier to entry in our world before we'll ever really be able to fix this.
It's tough. As you mentioned, to create that business, the idea to justify in the business sense. Not everybody has the need to create one more unicorn frappuccino.
Sure.
Right. How do you then translate some of the any initiatives and it's also true for getting the buy-in from the business units, right? So it's
right.
It's about selling what you're delivering to the executives and in the peers and so on, especially at the higher level of
right.
Management, right?
And larger corporations, larger enterprise. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how do you do that? What's your when you look at a problem, how do you then you know go ahead and figure out what is the best way to approach the kind of the messaging around that? Because I think that's what a lot of professionals struggle with. They know the technical
Yeah.
aspect of it, they understand the impact of what can go wrong, but then they find that translation to a business speak and justification and and selling, because that's what they
Yep.
really need to do. They have to sell their ideas to executives. They find that
Uh,
lacking.
I use analogies. I know it's hard to believe. But, I think if you boil it down, it's not just analogies. I mean, analogies help you translate
Yeah,
something that
just
someone
tell
has
them they're in a Mad
contextual.
Max movie,
Yeah,
and
yeah, they get it because they've seen Mad Max. They watch people chase. They remember, the lines, the famous things, and it correlates. And you're playing on emotion. And what I speak by that, and that can be dangerous, right? Because a lot of histrionics and crap happen with emotion. But what it really boils down to is empathy. What it really boils down to is relationships and understanding humans and understanding that human in specific, if you can, right? If you can tie an analogy to something someone cares about more than something they don't, then it's going to have more impact, right? Especially if you're trying to explain something that's hard to explain. Especially if you're trying to say, okay, well, why does log4j matter? Why is this such a big deal? And unless you understand the architectures of how things work and the way the data flows and how it would wind up in that log, no matter where it came from, and how that then has translation ability to make a shell, and what is a shell, and what does that mean when they have access, and you have to have some way to have that correlated in an analogy, right? Like, using your house of, imagine you just found out that there's this one vulnerability in every lock, and all you have to do is twist left twice and then right once, and you're in on every lock, everywhere. And also, by the way, they can get to every door. Nobody ever see. Like, if you can bring things into contextual things that people understand, then it works much better, right? And context is key. And so you have to have something that you can help the user, help the executive, or help someone be able to manipulate the model in their own brain, right? Like, I can manipulate the model of what happens in Log4j very easily. Like, I get it, and I understand why it matters and what we have to change and what we have to overcome. But like, when you try to do something like that or try to get buy-in for some particular endeavor, you have to tie it to something that's contextually referenceable for that person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what analogies for me do. But there's a lot of ways. A lot of people come with the raw business statistics. I've found myself in a position where I'm not having to convince executives against really hard things from private equity as much. Usually they're on board, and I happen to land in companies where the advice is well received and it's already going that direction without me. So I'm a little bit spoiled. But it's certainly, in the times that I have to convince people, it's usually analogy based.
Yeah,
Some
we
kind of
should create
corollary.
a cybersecurity analogy
Oh God.
repository where you can
Yeah,
just
yeah.
pick and
Others
choose. Like
can use them. Oh, that's
yeah,
so good.
yeah, you can search for like, okay, like any vulnerability, any kind of case, and then it will show
Yeah.
up like a couple like cool
Oh,
analogies you
that's
can
so
use,
funny. That would
because
be
that
so
will help
cool.
people. I mean, Matt.
Yeah.
I know you're busy, but maybe something we can work on
Oh,
together.
that's so cool. I'd love to play that project out.
Uh,
I've got one about fire escapes that's so poignant. But I do have to go. I'm back to backs today.
yeah, the
And
same. I was
so,
about to say that I feel like we got you know we got to at least do one more session. We cover a
oh,
couple
man.
things, but before I let
Yeah.
you go and run, what's the easiest way for people to reach out to you? Just for
Yep.
advice, for more information, to whatever the case may be. What's the easiest way?
LinkedIn's my primary platform. I
Okay.
far prefer it. I'm on YouTube under CyberMattLee. I'm also CyberMattLee on LinkedIn. So, those are my primary two platforms, cybermattlee.com. If you want some malware, you can go to eatsqrcode.com. But no, geez. But no, that my primary is LinkedIn.
Don't.
Yeah,
Okay,
don't go
good.
there.
Matt, thank you very much, and we'll do this again soon. Until then, thank you very much for whoever joined today, and looking forward to seeing you next time. And Matt, thank you again. It's been a real
Awesome.
pleasure.
Thank you as much.
Take care.